The old floorboards creak under my feet as I walk down the hallway of our little house on the outskirts of Michigan City. Elliot always promised to fix them, but he never did. Now that squeak is one of the few things that remind me of him. Besides the pictures on the walls and his old piano in the living room, I am 73 years old, and I became a widow 5 years ago. Sometimes I think time stopped the day Elliot's heart stopped beating, but the calendar mercilessly reminds me that more than 1,800 days have passed without him. I stop at the hallway mirror, examining my reflection. I gather my gray hair into a neat bundle, wrinkles cutting through my once smooth skin. My hands, pianist's hands, with long, slender fingers now give away age with knotted joints and protruding veins. Elliot always said he fell in love with me the first time he saw my hands on the keyboard. "Your fingers danced, Winnie," he whispered. It was like the keys had a life of their own, and only you knew how to talk to it. I turn away from the mirror and walk to the kitchen. Every morning I make myself a cup of Ceylon tea that my old friend Louise from Chicago sends me. We met at the conservatory 60 years ago and still keep in touch. This little ritual is part of my routine since I live alone. Looking out the window at the small garden behind the house, I am reminded of the life we used to live. Elliot was a talented cellist. I was a hopeful pianist. We met at an audition for the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. Both got places. Both dreamed of big careers. Then Beatrice was born, and our dreams changed. Elliot and I decided that one of us should keep performing and the other should take care of the baby. He was the choice. I left my career as a performer and began teaching music. When Beatrice turned 10, it became apparent that she had an extraordinary talent for the visual arts. Not music as we had hoped, but drawing. Her watercolors amazed even experienced artists. Elliot and I didn't hesitate to give the girl a better education. For this reason, Elliot left the orchestra and we moved to Michigan City, where there was a prestigious art school. Here he got a job teaching music at a local college, and I gave private piano lessons, the kettle whistles, bringing me back from memory to the present. Beatrice is now an influential art historian in Chicago. She has her own gallery, connections in the art world, a life that has nothing to do with our quiet Lake Michigan home. After Elliot's death, I noticed how her attitude toward me gradually changed. First, she came every weekend, then once a month, and now I only see her at Christmas, and not always. Phone conversations have become short and formal. "Everything okay, Mom?" "Great. I have a meeting in 5 minutes. I'll call you back next week." She never calls back. I pull a cream-colored, gold-embossed envelope from the mailbox. "Beatrice Quinlan and Theodore Hollingsworth invite you to share in the joy of their marriage." I don't immediately remember who Theodore Hollingsworth is. I think Beatrice mentioned him briefly in our last conversation, son of the owners of a chain of art galleries on the East Coast. A man in her circle. I reread the invitation several times before I realized the ceremony is in a month. Why didn't Beatrice tell me this earlier? Or did I miss this information in one of our brief conversations? A heaviness arises in my chest, either resentment or disappointment. I matter so little in her life that she didn't even see fit to tell me in person about her own wedding. The phone rings, interrupting the flow of unhappy thoughts. "Mom, did you get the invitation?" Beatrice's voice sounds strained, as if she were performing an unpleasant duty. "Yes, dear, I just did. Congratulations. Theodore must be a wonderful young man." "He's perfect." She finally shows emotion in her voice. "You have no idea what kind of family he has. His mother, Olivia, is an incredible woman. She runs an arts charity and is on the board of directors of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I'm happy for you," I say sincerely, though my heart sinks at the "you have no idea" part. "I need you to come to Chicago for a dress fitting. I've booked you a room at the Drake Hotel. The driver will pick you up Friday morning. Dress? I'm asking you again. Of course, you're the mother of the bride. You can't just show up at a wedding wearing nothing. I've picked out a few options from Virginia Hill. It's non-negotiable. I'm tempted to remind you that I have a perfectly decent dress for special occasions, but I realize that's useless. In anything, those words say more than all the unspoken reproaches. All right, darling, I'll be there. And, Mom, she pauses. Try to look, you know, this is an important event for me and for Theodore's family. After the conversation ends, I sit looking out the window for a long time. I know exactly what she means by try to look your best. Don't embarrass me in front of my new family. Don't show how old-fashioned and provincial you are. Be someone else, not yourself. Lately, I feel like my hands aren't obeying the way they used to. Small objects slip out of my fingers, and sometimes I notice a slight tremor. I used to write it off as age, but this morning, as I try to button my blouse, I realize the problem is more serious than I thought. Dr. Nielsen is seeing me without an appointment. He knew Elliot and me for over 20 years, treated Beatrice for her childhood illnesses, and was there for her when Elliot died. What brings you here today, Winifred? He asks, gesturing for me to sit down. I tell him about my symptoms, the shaking hands, the lack of coordination, the sudden lapses in memory that are becoming more and more noticeable. He listens carefully, then runs some tests. He asks me to follow his finger with my eyes, to walk in a straight line, to touch the tip of my nose with my eyes closed. I'd like to refer you to a neurologist, he finally says. Dr. Patel is one of the best specialists in the state. I'll call him today. Is it serious? I ask, though I can already see the answer in his eyes. It's too soon to tell, Winifred, but it's best not to delay. On the way home, I think about Beatrice's upcoming wedding. Should I tell her of my suspicions? Should I mar her happiness with my troubles? She has waited so long for this moment. Theodore is her chance to enter the high society she has always aspired to. At home, I enter Elliot's study. This room was left untouched after his death. His cello in its case stands in the corner, his sheet music neatly arranged on the desk, an unread book with a bookmark lying on the windowsill. And there, on the top shelf of the closet, I see an old carved mahogany box, a gift from his father when we were married. In it, Elliot kept the things dearest to his heart, our wedding rings before we were married, Beatrice's first lock of hair, the programs from our performances. I hadn't touched the box since the day he died. I couldn't bring myself to open that door to the past. But today, standing on the threshold of a possible diagnosis, I suddenly feel the need to connect to what was important to both of us. I don't reach for the box. I just stare at it. Maybe it's time to sort through Elliot's things, to find something special for Beatrice, something from her father that she could take with her into her new life. That thought keeps me going all evening. I make myself a simple dinner, thinking about what I'll say to my daughter when I arrive for my fitting. What will we talk about? Will she want to hear stories about her childhood? About how Elliot taught her how to hold a bow, hoping she would follow in his footsteps? About how he accepted her choice and was secretly proud of every watercolor she painted? We used to be a real family. What changed? When did the gulf between us become so wide it's impossible to cross? I go to bed, but I can't sleep. In front of me is Beatrice's face, not the now successful and cold one, but the little girl who asked me to play Moonlight Sonata every night before bed. One more time, Mommy, please, she would whisper, snuggling against my side as my fingers slid across the keys. In moments like these, I had no regrets about the career I had left behind. My music has found the most grateful listener. In the morning, I wake up with determination. I will go to that fitting and smile. I will choose a dress that Beatrice will love and play the role of the happy mother of the bride. And I'll tell her about the diagnosis after the wedding. No need to mar her happy day with my problems. With these thoughts, I get up and go to prepare my morning tea, trying to ignore the treacherous trembling of my hands. Dr. Patel's office resembles a modern art museum. The walls are painted a muted gray, with abstract paintings in thin metal frames. The minimalism of the furnishings should probably be calming to patients, but it only makes me more anxious. I sit in a cushioned chair with my hands folded in my lap and listen to my sentence. Dr. Patel, a middle-aged man with attentive eyes and graying temples, speaks softly and thoughtfully, as if every word carries weight. Mrs. Quinlan, the results of your tests and examinations indicate early-stage Parkinson's disease. It's a progressive neurological disease that, all I can hear is a series of phrases: dopaminergic neurons, resting tremor, bradykinesia. My brain refuses to see the whole picture, clinging to scraps of information. Is there a cure? I interrupt, even though I already know the answer. Dr. Patel is silent for a moment, his gaze softening. There is no complete cure at the moment, he replies, but modern medicine offers many ways to control symptoms and slow the progression of the disease. He talks at length about medications, physical therapy, and possible surgical treatments. I nod in all the right places, pretending to understand and accept everything. In fact, a strange calm is growing inside me. My condition now has a name. I now know what is happening to my body. How fast will the disease progress? I ask. It is individualized for each patient. For some, the symptoms build up very slowly, over years. In others, the changes can be more noticeable and quicker. I look at my hands, these hands that once ran across the keys with such ease that audiences would swoon with delight. Now they betray me. I wonder if I can still play, or will that too be taken from me? Do you have loved ones to offer support? Dr. Patel asks as I'm about to leave. Family, friends? It's important not to be alone with this diagnosis. I think about Beatrice, her upcoming wedding, how excited she is about her new life and her new family. I have a daughter, I answer. But she's getting married soon. I don't want to mar her happiness. Dr. Patel looks at me with understanding, but there is doubt in his gaze. Perhaps she would like to know, to support you? I shake my head. After the wedding. I'll tell her after the wedding. As I walk back home, I think about how Beatrice has always been too busy with her own dreams and ambitions to notice other people's problems. As a child, when Elliot worked late to pay for her art lessons, she never asked why Daddy was so tired. When I turned down an invitation to teach at the New England Conservatory of Music because her school was here in Michigan City, she took it for granted. Elliot and I never told her about our sacrifices. We believed that love didn't require recognition. Now, I'm not sure that was right. On Friday morning, a black sedan with a polite uniformed driver picks me up from my house. The drive to Chicago takes just under 2 hours. I look out the window at the scenery whizzing by. Forests are replaced by fields, fields by suburbs, and those gradually turn into city neighborhoods. The Drake Hotel greets me with a majestic facade and impeccable service. The receptionist escorts me to a room on the 15th floor overlooking Lake Michigan. The view is breathtaking, but I can't shake the thought that it's all an attempt by Beatrice to create a semblance of well-being. The room probably costs more than I spend in a month. The fitting is scheduled for 2 o'clock in the afternoon at a boutique in Virginia Hill on Michigan Avenue. When I arrive, Beatrice is already there, surrounded by sales consultants and friends whose names I can barely remember. She's wearing an elegant white dress that emphasizes her slender figure and the golden hair she inherited from Elliot. Mom! She kisses me on the cheek but doesn't hug me. You're just in time. We're just getting started. The next 3 hours turn into a fashion show. I'm asked to try on 5 different dresses, all in pastel colors, all from famous designers, all with price tags that make me shudder inwardly. It's too much, Beatrice, I say quietly when we manage to be alone. I can buy my own dress. She looks at me as if I'd suggested I come to the wedding in my pajamas. Mom, it's my wedding, and I want it to be perfect. Just let me take care of it. Her tone leaves no room for objection. I sigh and try on the 5th dress, a delicate lavender one, with long sleeves that hide my hands with their treacherous tremors. This one, Beatrice decides. It's perfect. We spend the evening at dinner with the groom's family at a restaurant whose name I can't pronounce. Theodore Hollingsworth turns out to be a tall young man with perfect posture and attentive eyes. He is polite and courteous to me, but I sense that this politeness is merely a tribute to etiquette. His mother, Olivia Hollingsworth, is a real socialite. Slender, with impeccable raven wing hair, she exudes confidence and superiority. Her handshake is firm but cold. "We are so pleased to meet you, Winifred," she said, eyeing me with an appraising gaze. "Beatrice has told me so much about you." I doubt it's true. The way Beatrice looks at her future mother-in-law, with admiration and a touch of envy, she wishes she had a different mother. At dinner, the conversation revolves around the upcoming wedding, the property in the Hamptons where the newlyweds will honeymoon, and the latest exhibition at the Hollingsworth Gallery. I'm silent most of the time, sipping my mineral water and trying to hide my shaking hands. "What did you do before you retired, Winifred?" Olivia suddenly asks, and all eyes are on me. "I taught piano," I answered, "and I used to give private music lessons." "Oh, that's sweet," she smiles, but her eyes remain cold. "Our grandmother was a music teacher, too. It's such a noble thing to do." There's condescension in her tone, and I can see Beatrice tense up. "Actually, Mom was a talented pianist," she says suddenly. "She played in the Chicago Symphony Orchestra." I look at my daughter in surprise. She has never mentioned my musical background in conversations with her friends. "Really?" Olivia's voice has a note of interest in it. "And why did you leave such a career?" I meet Beatrice's gaze. She shakes her head slightly, as if warning me not to say too much. "Family circumstances," I answer simply. "Sometimes you have to make choices." The rest of dinner is spent discussing the details of the wedding. I learned that the ceremony will be held at a historic lakeside mansion, that 300 guests have been invited, and that Chicago's most expensive wedding planner is handling the arrangements. As we say goodbye, Olivia Hollingsworth takes my hand and says with a smile, "Beatrice is a real asset to our family. You should be proud of how far she has come." In the cab on the way to the hotel, Beatrice suddenly says, "Mommy, I forgot to tell you. I've decided that you shouldn't attend the wedding rehearsal next week. It's going to be very tiring, a lot of fuss." "But shouldn't the mother of the bride be at the rehearsal?" "Usually, yes." She looks out the window, avoiding my gaze. "But Olivia will take care of everything. She's more experienced at this sort of thing. You won't be offended, will you?" I feel a prick of pain, but I force myself to smile. "Of course not, darling." For the next 3 weeks, I only find out about many of the wedding-related activities post facto. There was the pre-wedding breakfast with my girlfriends, organized by Olivia. There was the selection of floral arrangements, handled by Beatrice and her future mother-in-law. There was even a visit to a jeweler to choose gifts for the guests, which I learned about from a casual conversation on the phone. Each time, Beatrice finds a reason why I shouldn't bother. "You live so far away." "You'll be bored." Olivia has already organized everything. With each such explanation, I feel more and more alienated from my own daughter. My visits to Dr. Patel are becoming regular. He adjusts medication dosages, prescribes physical therapy. Some days are better, some days are worse. I start keeping a symptom diary as he advises, noting when the tremors get worse and when they are almost imperceptible. One evening, a week before the wedding, I finally decide to open Elliot's box. I want to find something special for Beatrice, a reminder of her father that she could take with her into her new life. Sitting on the floor of his office, I carefully open the lid. Inside are all the treasures Elliot had carefully guarded, our wedding rings wrapped in a velvet flap, programs from concerts we'd performed together, a lock of Beatrice's baby hair in a small envelope labeled First Haircut, 3 years old, photos, letters, theater tickets, a dried flower I wore in my hair the day we got engaged, and at the very bottom, a small USB drive with a simple inscription, For B. My heart skips a beat. Elliot always called Beatrice B when he was especially affectionate with her. I turn on Elliot's old laptop that still sits on his desk. I insert the drive and open the single file, a videotape dated 3 days before he died. The screen comes to life, and I see him, gaunt, pale, but still with that fire in his eyes that I loved so much. Hi, B, he says, and his voice, which I haven't heard in 5 years, fills the room. I hold back tears. If you're watching this, it means I'm gone. And it's probably been a while. He pauses, gathering his thoughts. I want to tell you something Mom and I never talked about the decisions we made for you. Not because we wanted you to feel obligated, but because I want you to know what our love for you was. He talks about how I turned down a spot in the orchestra when she was born, how we both turned down tours that could have made us famous, how we sold the house in Chicago and moved to Michigan City for her education, how he left the orchestra and became a teacher at a much lower salary to pay for her tuition at a prestigious school. We've never regretted it, B, Elliot says, and his eyes sparkle. Every time we saw your paintings, heard your teacher's praise, saw you blossom, we knew we'd done the right thing. He pauses once more, and I can see him struggling to contain his emotions. I just want you to know, your mom gave so much more for you than I did. She had real talent, B. She could have been great. The critics wrote about her magic touch on the keys. But she chose you. She always chose you. Remember that and appreciate her, even if she'll never tell you that herself. The recording ends and I sit in silence, tears streaming down my cheeks. I think back to Elliot's last days, his weakness, his struggle with his illness. Apparently, he recorded this video in one of those moments when he was feeling a little better. Why didn't he show it to Beatrice himself? Maybe he didn't have time. Maybe he didn't want to tarnish her career advancement with stories of victimization. Or maybe he just didn't find the right moment. I stare at the screen where my husband's face is frozen. I realize now that I should bring that drive with me to the wedding, not to show the tape that would ruin the day for Beatrice, but simply as a talisman, a reminder that Elliot will always be with both of us, even on such an important day. With that thought in mind, I turn off the laptop, carefully placing the drive back in its box and then into the purse I'll take with me to the wedding. May Elliot be there for me. May he give me the strength to endure the day with dignity, despite the illness and the growing gap between my daughter and me. The day of Beatrice's wedding was clear and sunny, as if nature herself had decided to participate in the festivities. I arrived at Lakeview Manor 3 hours before the ceremony began, as indicated on my name card with a detailed schedule. The historic 19th century mansion surrounded by manicured gardens looked fabulous. The beige stone facade glistened in the morning light. The flags fluttered in the wind, and Lake Michigan sparkled behind the immaculately trimmed hedges. Inside, there was an atmosphere of controlled chaos as florists arranged the last of the bouquets, waiters prepared tables, and photographers set up equipment. I walked down the hallway, looking for the bride's room listed on the schedule. My hands were trembling more than usual. It must have been the excitement. I'd increased my medication this morning, but the tremors were still noticeable. Finally, I found the right door and knocked gently. "Come in." Dash came an unfamiliar voice. At least 6 people were bustling about in the spacious room with large windows and antique furniture. A makeup artist was working on my daughter's face. A hairdresser was styling her hair. An assistant wedding planner was hanging her dress, and 3 bridesmaids in silk gowns were sipping champagne. Beatrice spotted me in the mirror and smiled tensely. "Mom, you're already here." "Good. You can wait in the living room while we finish getting ready. I was wondering if there was anything I could do to help," I asked, trying to keep my voice lighthearted. One of the friends, I think her name was Veronica, gave me an appraising look. "Everything's under control, Mrs. Quinlan. The professionals know what they're doing." Beatrice nodded, keeping her eyes on her reflection. "Yes, Mother. Better get some rest before the ceremony. You'll have your own exit with Theodore's mother." I felt a pang of disappointment. In traditional weddings, the bride's mother is supposed to be by her daughter's side, helping her dress, sharing wisdom and memories. But obviously, Beatrice preferred the company of her friends and professional helpers. "Of course, dear," I smiled. "I'll be in the parlor if you need me." I spent the next hour sitting in a cozy chair in the living room, flipping through old magazines and watching busy people go by, none of whom paid any attention to me. There was a USB drive with Elliot's tape in my purse, and I touched it periodically as if it would give me strength. 30 minutes before the ceremony, Olivia Hollingsworth showed up in an elegant silver gray suit that was undoubtedly worth more than all my clothes combined. "Winifred, there you are," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's time to take our seats." We entered together under the arm of the steward. The ceremony was as flawless as a theatrical production. Beatrice looked dazzling in a gown from a famous designer, with her veil flowing behind her like mist. Theodore stood at the altar, tall and elegant, with an expression of awe on his face. When the master of ceremonies asked who was giving this woman in marriage, I stood up feeling a lump in my throat. I had to utter the simple phrase, "I, her mother." But before I could speak, Olivia's voice came out. "We, her family." I froze in place. Technically, she was right. She was representing the groom's family, and I was representing the bride's. But in that moment, I felt like I'd been robbed of even that small role. Nevertheless, I held back and went back to my seat, swallowing my tears and smiling for the photographers. After the ceremony, the guests moved to a huge marquee set up in the garden. Inside, everything was decorated in cream and gold colors, countless floral arrangements, crystal dishes, exquisite tablecloths. The tables were arranged around a small dance floor, in the center of which stood a majestic wedding cake 5 tiers high. I noticed that my place at the table was quite far away from the main table of the newlyweds, where Beatrice, Theodore, and his parents were seated. Instead, I was seated at a table with the groom's distant relatives and a few older guests who seemed as confused as I was. During the cocktail hour, I tried to talk to Beatrice, but she was always surrounded by guests or busy with the photographer. I only had time for a glimpse of congratulations to her and Theodore before they were whisked away for another photo shoot. Feeling out of place and unnecessary, I retreated to a less crowded corner of the tent. There, trying to control the growing tremor in my hands, I overheard a conversation coming from behind a floral arrangement. I recognized Beatrice's voice talking to her girlfriends. "It's a good thing we didn't let her in on the planning," one of the girls was saying. "She would have ruined everything with her old-fashioned ideas." "I know," Beatrice replied with a slight chuckle. "She'd be a real burden. Have you seen how her hands shake? Can you imagine what would happen to the pictures?" My heart squeezed. She noticed my tremor, but instead of worry, she felt only shame. I wanted to leave, but my feet felt like they were stuck to the floor. Your future mother-in-law is adorable, though, the other friend continued. So elegant and confident. And that dress. Olivia is exactly the kind of mother I've always dreamed of, Beatrice said, and her words stabbed me like a knife. Successful, sophisticated, well-connected in the right circles, not like my... At that moment, I accidentally touched the vase on the table next to me, and it jingled. The conversation over the flowers abruptly ended. I hurriedly stepped back, trying to hide my tears. I headed for the ladies' room to gather my thoughts, but as I opened the door, I heard Beatrice's voice again. She was standing in the mirror with Olivia, fixing her makeup. And I'm so grateful that you've taken charge of the organization, my daughter said. My mother is a pathetic loser, nothing like you. She would never have been able to handle such an event. Olivia put her hand on Beatrice's shoulder with motherly tenderness. Sweetheart, you're part of our family now. And we take care of our own. I closed the door quietly, not giving away my presence. Every word from my daughter stung more than acid. Pathetic loser. Was that how she saw the woman who'd given up her career, her dreams, her ambition for her success, who wiped away her tears, cured her illnesses, applauded her every accomplishment? Something broke inside me. The pain was so sharp that it shifted into a strange calm. I returned to my desk, smiling mechanically and nodding to my neighbors. But there was only one thought running through my mind. Beatrice must know the truth. She must know the cost of her present position. Soon, the toasts began. Theodore's father made a long, emotional speech about the future of the young ones. Then Olivia spoke, saying how happy she was to welcome such a talented girl like Beatrice into their family. Friends of the bride and groom exchanged funny stories and well wishes. When it was my turn, the host announced with some surprise, "And now the mother of the bride, Mrs. Winifred Quinlan, has the floor." I rose slowly, feeling everyone's eyes on me. Beatrice looked tense, as if she expected disaster. I approached the microphone, holding my purse, which contained a USB drive. I haven't prepared a long speech, I began, trying to keep my voice firm. Instead, I want to share with you a message from a man who is not with us today, but who loved Beatrice very much. From her father, my husband, Elliot Quinlan. A whisper rippled through the room. Beatrice straightened in her chair, her eyes widening. "Mom," she said warningly, but I had already pulled out the drive and handed it to the technician who controlled the audio-visual equipment. "Please," I told him. "There's only one file. Can you put it on the screen?" He nodded, and a few seconds later, the big screen set up for wedding photos came to life. Elliot's face, gaunt from illness but still full of inner light, filled the space. There was absolute silence in the marquee. "Hello, Bea," Elliot began, and I saw Beatrice flinch when she heard that childish nickname. "If you're watching this, that means I'm gone. And it's probably been a while." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I want to tell you something Mom and I never talked about the decisions we made for you. Not because we wanted you to feel obligated, but because I want you to know what our love for you was." I wasn't looking at the screen, but at my daughter's face. It changed with every phrase Elliot said, from annoyance to bewilderment, then to shock. "Your mom was a rising star, Bea. She had a solo contract. Critics wrote about her magical touch on the keys. She could have been great. But when you were born, someone had to stay home. I was older, an established musician. It made sense for me to leave my career behind. But your mom insisted I keep playing. You have more experience," she said. "You'll be able to provide for us better." Beatrice's face went pale. She had never heard the story. "When you were 10 and we realized what a talent you had for drawing, we didn't hesitate for a second. We sold our house in Chicago. the only substantial possessions we had, and moved to Michigan City for your school. I left the orchestra and became a teacher at a much lower salary so we could pay for your education." Elliot smiled warmly at the screen. "We never regretted it, B. Every time we saw your work, heard your teacher's praise, watched you blossom, we knew we did the right thing. But I want you to understand, it was our conscious choice. We could have had a different life, the life of concert musicians. Instead, we chose you." There was such silence in the marquee that you could hear a pin drop. All the guests looked back and forth at the screen, then at Beatrice, then at me. Your mother never told you about her sacrifices because she didn't see them as sacrifices. To her, it was a gift of love. But I want you to know, she could have been someone else, had a very different destiny. She chose to be your mom, and it was the most meaningful choice of her life. Beatrice's face contorted with emotion. Tears streamed down her cheeks, smearing her flawless makeup. "I just ask you for one thing, B. Appreciate your mom, not for what she could have become, but for what she became for you. She'll never ask that of herself. But I am asking you, from me and from her." The recording ended and the screen went out. There was a sepulchral silence in the tent. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on me, standing at the microphone, and on Beatrice, frozen at the head table. I took a deep breath and said into the microphone, "I wasn't going to show that video. It was supposed to stay between me and Elliot, but today I found out that my daughter thinks I'm a pathetic loser." I saw Beatrice wince as she recognized her words. "I wanted you to know the truth, Beatrice. Not to make you feel guilty, but to make you realize everyone makes their own choices in life. I chose you, and despite all the pain you've caused me, I would do it again." I put the microphone down and headed for the exit of the tent. No one tried to stop me. No one said a word. It was only when I passed Beatrice's desk that she tried to grab my arm. "Mom," she breathed out. "I didn't know." I gently released her hand. "Now you do," I replied quietly, and continued on my way out. As I stepped out of the tent into the cool evening air, I felt strangely relieved. It was as if the weight I had been carrying for years had finally lifted from my shoulders. I didn't know what would happen next, how this scene would affect my relationship with Beatrice, what the guests would say. But in that moment, I didn't care. For the first time in years, I was completely honest, with my daughter and with myself. I walked along the gravel path away from the marquee and heard the rumble of voices gradually growing behind me. The shock of my speech was wearing off, and the guests were beginning to discuss what had happened. The air was cool, and the sky gradually darkened, taking on a deep indigo hue. The stars were coming through one by one, as if someone was slowly lighting fires on a black canvas. My heels faded into the gravel, and I took off my shoes, feeling the cool pebbles on my bare feet. A strange sense of freedom swept over me, as if I had shed not only the uncomfortable shoes, but also the heavy burden I had carried for years. "Mrs. Quinlan," a man's voice came from behind me. "Wait, please." I turned around and saw a young man hurrying toward me. I didn't recognize him at first, but as he got closer, I realized that he was Theodore's younger brother, Owen Hollingsworth. Unlike his older brother, with his impeccable posture and classic good looks, Owen was more relaxed, with disheveled dark hair and lively eyes. He was in his mid-20s, and I'd noticed during the pre-wedding events that he kept somewhat apart from the rest of the family. "Dash Mrs. Quinlan," he repeated, catching up with me. "Are you all right? Where are you going?" I smiled weakly. "Home, I guess, or to a hotel, somewhere far away from here." He looked at my bare feet and the shoes in my hand, then took off his jacket and slipped it over my shoulders. "The evening is getting chilly. Let me at least call you a cab." I wanted to refuse, to say I could manage on my own, but I suddenly felt so tired. My adrenaline-fueled determination began to wane, and my hands shook again. "Thank you," I said quietly. "That's very kind of you." We walked slowly to the main gate, where we could call a car. We were followed by several other guests, an older couple who sat at the table with me, and a middle-aged woman I didn't remember. They all kept some distance, giving Owen and I room to talk, but their presence felt like silent support. It was impressive, Owen said after a long silence. "What you did back there in the tent. I've never seen my mother so speechless." There was no judgment in his voice, just something akin to admiration. I shook my head. I hadn't planned for this. I didn't want to make a scene at Beatrice's wedding. "But she deserved it, didn't she?" he asked softly. "What she said about you. It was cruel." I looked at him in surprise. I hadn't expected such a reaction from a member of the Hollingsworth family. "You don't think I ruined my daughter's wedding?" Owen shrugged his shoulders. "I think everyone gets what they deserve. Beatrice was ungrateful and cruel. And you just told the truth." We reached the gate and Owen pulled out his phone to call a cab. "Where do you want to go? Back to Michigan City or to some hotel here in Chicago?" I thought for a moment. Michigan City was almost 2 hours away, and the thought of a long drive alone scared me. "Probably to a hotel. I had a room booked at the Drake until tomorrow." Owen nodded and made the reservation. "The cab will be here in 10 minutes, he informed me, putting his phone away. "I'll wait with you." We sat down on a stone bench by the gate. An elderly couple and a middle-aged woman also stopped nearby. The man, gray-haired, with kind wrinkles around his eyes, came over to us and held out his hand. "Edward Prescott," he introduced himself. "And this is my wife Eleanor. We've been friends of your husband since the conservatory." "Yes, I remember you," I replied, remembering. "You played cello with Elliot in the orchestra. He often remembered you." "Elliot was a wonderful musician and man," Edward said. "We were shocked when we learned that he had left his career for his daughter. But now that we've heard the full story, Winifred, you've both done something remarkable." His wife, a frail woman with silver hair, took my hand. "We want you to know we're on your side. What your daughter did is unforgivable." I felt tears come to my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered. "It means a lot to me." The middle-aged woman came closer. She had an open face with light freckles and reddish hair. "Lydia Montgomery," she introduced herself. "I teach at the art school where Beatrice went to school. I remember you. You always came to all the exhibitions, always supported her. And this is how she thanked you. It's embarrassing." There was genuine indignation in her voice. "Were you her teacher?" I asked, trying to remember. "Not the main one. I taught art history. Beatrice was a talented student, but always too arrogant. Now I understood where that came from." While we were talking, a few more people headed toward us from the tent. I peered anxiously at their silhouettes, fearing to see Beatrice or Olivia. But they were other guests, many of whom I didn't even know. They came over, shaking my hand, expressing support. Some told stories about Elliot, about what a wonderful musician and person he was. Others said they were touched by our family's history and admired our sacrifice for our daughter. Owen watched in silence, standing slightly off to the side. When the cab arrived, he helped me up from the bench. "Let me walk you out," he said. "I'd like to make sure you got to the hotel safely." I looked at him gratefully. "But you're going to miss part of the wedding." He shrugged. "Nothing important is going to happen there anymore. After you left, everything turned into chaos. Beatrice is sobbing. My mother is trying to save the day. Theodore looks like he doesn't know which side he's on. Believe me, I won't miss a thing." We said goodbye to Edward, Eleanor and the rest of the sympathetic guests. I exchanged contacts with them, promising to get in touch when I got home. Then Owen and I got into a cab. The drive to the hotel passed mostly in silence. I stared out the window at the lights of Chicago passing by, feeling a strange mixture of emotions, emptiness, relief, quiet sadness, and some new, unformed sense of freedom. Can I ask you a question? Owen broke the silence when we were almost at the hotel. I nodded. What's wrong with your hands? He asked softly. I'd noticed they were shaking. Beatrice had mentioned it in her conversation with her friends. I looked at my hands lying in my lap. The tremor was noticeable even in the dim light of the cab's interior. Parkinson's disease, I answered quietly. Early stage. I'd learned of the diagnosis a month before the wedding. Owen looked shocked. And you didn't tell Beatrice? I didn't want to spoil her happiness. I thought I'd tell her after the honeymoon. He shook his head, and in his eyes I saw a mixture of surprise and admiration. You're a remarkable woman, Mrs. Quinlan. Even after everything she did, you still thought of her. I smiled weakly. She's my daughter. No matter how she treats me, I will always love her. The cab stopped at the entrance to the Drake Hotel. Owen insisted on walking me to my room. In your condition, you shouldn't be alone, he said with concern. Maybe I could call a doctor? Or help with something else? You've already done more than enough, I replied as we walked up to my room. Thank you, Owen, for your kindness, for your compassion. You're not like the other Hollingsworths. He laughed. That's the best compliment I've heard in a long time. I've always been the lousy sheep of the family, refused to go into the family business and instead decided to become a public school music teacher. My mother still can't forgive me for that. I looked at him in surprise. You teach music? What instrument? Piano, he answered. Not professionally, of course, but enough to teach children to love music. I felt a strange kinship with this young man, so different from his pompous family. Elliot would be glad to hear that, I said. He had always believed that music education was a gift that should be available to all children, regardless of their background. Owen nodded. I'd like to meet him. He sounds like a wonderful person. He was. We stood at the door of my room, and I could sense that Owen didn't want to leave, worrying about me. I'll be fine, I assured him. I really was. Go on, go back to the wedding. I'm sure your family is looking for you. They'll be fine without me, he replied, but still pulled a business card out of his pocket. Here you go. It's got my phone number and email. If you need anything at all, please contact me. I took the card, touched by his concern. Thank you, Owen. He paused for another moment, then awkwardly hugged me and walked quickly away toward the elevator. I stared after him, thinking about how strange the situation was. I'd found more understanding and support in my fiancé's brother than in my own daughter. When I entered the room, the first thing I did was to take off my lavender dress and hang it carefully in the closet. Despite everything that had happened, it was a gift from Beatrice, and I couldn't just throw it away. Then I took a long, hot shower, trying to wash away the tension of the day. In my hotel robe, I sat on my bed and for the first time truly realized the magnitude of what had happened. I'd made a scene at my own daughter's wedding, publicly revealed family secrets, probably ruined my relationship with Beatrice forever. But the strange thing is, I felt no remorse, only fatigue and a strange, almost unearthly calm. It was as if I had finally shed the weight I had carried for years of pretending that everything was all right, that my relationship with Beatrice was normal, that I wasn't hurt by her disdain and shame for my humble life. I remembered Elliot's face on the screen, his words about our sacrifices, about my failed talent. He'd always believed in me more than I believed in myself, always said my fingers could work magic on the keyboard, and even though my career ended before it began, I've never regretted my choice. Until today. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to wonder, what if I'd kept performing? What if Elliot and I hadn't sacrificed our careers for Beatrice? Would she have been happier? Would we have been happier? They were meaningless questions. The past couldn't be changed, and I couldn't know how our lives would have turned out differently. But one thing I knew for sure was that I would no longer live in the shadow of shame and ingratitude. I would not apologize for the life I had lived, the choices I had made. I walked to the window and looked out at the lights of Chicago at night. Somewhere out there, Beatrice was probably still at her wedding, crying, angry, trying to salvage the evening after my performance. Or maybe she and Theodore had already left, escaping the scandal and prying eyes. Suddenly, I realized I didn't care anymore. I had done my best as a mother. Her life was hers now, and mine was mine. I closed the curtains and went to bed. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could actually fall asleep without heavy thoughts. Tomorrow, I'll be back in Michigan City, back in my little house with creaking floorboards and memories of Elliot. I'll live my life, fight my illness, maybe even get back to music while I can still play. And if Beatrice ever wants to be a part of my life again, on equal terms, with respect and understanding, the door will be open. But I will no longer run after her, begging for crumbs of attention. No longer would I take her neglect for granted. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. Free from the fear of losing my daughter. Free from having to conform to other people's expectations. Free to be myself, Winifred Quinlan, a woman with her own dignity and history. With these thoughts, I closed my eyes and fell into a deep, healing sleep. Back in Michigan City, I found that news of my performance at Beatrice's wedding had already reached the city. Small towns don't keep secrets well, especially when it comes to the locals. Several guests from the gala lived here, and the story quickly spread among neighbors and acquaintances. The first person to stop by was Helen Rodriguez, my neighbor on my right, whom we'd been friends with for over 15 years. She showed up on the doorstep the day after I returned with a pot of homemade soup and a concerned expression on her swarthy face. Dash. I heard what happened, she said without preamble, walking into the kitchen and putting the soup on the stove. The whole town is talking about it. I sighed, sinking into a chair. I guess I'm the local scandalizer now. Helen snorted, pulling teacups out of the cupboard. More like a heroine. A lot of people here remember what you and Elliot were like as musicians, and everyone saw how you lived for Beatrice, that she treated you that way. She shook her head. I'm sorry, Winnie, but what your daughter did was unforgivable. I watched Helen move about my kitchen with the familiar ease of an old friend. We'd spent countless hours around this table, talking about the kids, sharing recipes, supporting each other in times of need. She'd been there for me when Elliot died, bringing food, making sure I wasn't alone for too long. She deserved to know the whole truth. Helen, I began, looking at my hands. There's something else no one knows. I have Parkinson's. Her hands froze over the kettle. She turned to me slowly, and I saw a mixture of shock and deep sympathy in her eyes. How long ago did you find out? Not long before the wedding. I didn't want to mar the occasion, so I didn't tell anyone. Not even Beatrice? She sounded distrustful. Especially Beatrice, I smiled weakly. Though I suppose that doesn't matter now. Helen sat down across from me and took my trembling hands in hers. What did the doctors say? What was the prognosis? I told her everything I'd learned from Dr. Patel, the slow progression of the disease, the medications and physical therapy, the fact that I would probably need help in the long run. But it won't be soon, I concluded. Right now, I'm doing quite well on my own. Helen listened attentively without interrupting me. When I finished, she nodded decisively. All right, here's what we'll do. First, we'll tell everyone who needs to know. No secrets. Second, we'll make a schedule. I can come in on Tuesdays and Fridays. Martha Lewinsky, she'll never say no. On Mondays and Thursdays. Robert Chen can drive you to your doctor's appointments. He always has time to spare. Helen, I interrupted her planning, feeling tears coming to my throat. I can't ask people. You're not, she cut me off. We're offering, and if you refuse, we'll still come, so you'd better accept it. There was such determination in her eyes that I didn't argue. Instead, I squeezed her hands and whispered, "Thank you." The words seemed so insignificant compared to what she was offering, but Helen seemed to understand the depth of my gratitude. Over the next week, my house turned into a semblance of a community center. Neighbors, former students, Elliot's college colleagues came by. They all expressed support, offered help, and shared stories of how my husband and I had impacted their lives. Some confided that they had always admired my acting and regretted that I had left my career so early. Martha Lewinsky, a retired librarian with lush gray hair and the energy of a teenager, brought me a recording device. "You need to write down your story, Winnie," she said, setting the recorder on the table. "Everything, from the beginning. How you and Elliot met, how you decided to sacrifice your career for your daughter. Everything. It's important." "To who?" I asked, looking at the device questioningly. "For you," she answered simply. "For history, for those who would come after." I wasn't sure my story was worth preserving, but something in her words touched a string in my soul. Maybe I really should have left a mark, told the truth in my own words. Robert Chen, the young music teacher who inherited Elliot's position at the college, came with an even bolder proposition. "You must write down your music, Mrs. Quinlan," he said, sitting on the edge of a chair in my living room. "All the pieces you've never played publicly, your interpretations of the classics, your own compositions, if you have any." Robert, my hands. I showed him my trembling fingers. "I can't play like I used to." "But you can still play," he insisted. "Maybe not for the concert hall, but definitely for a record. We have a studio at the college. We can do it gradually, piece by piece when you have good days. It'll be a legacy." I looked at my hands, the pianist's hands that were betraying me more and more. The idea of leaving behind music, of preserving at least some of what might have been if I'd continued my career, seemed strangely appealing. "I'll think about it," I replied, not promising anything concrete. But the thought would not let me go. That evening, I sat down at Elliot's piano, an instrument I'd barely touched since his death. The keys were cool under my fingers, familiar and yet strangely alien. I began to play a simple melody, one I had composed many years ago when Beatrice was still a child. My hands trembled and I made mistakes, but the basic melody still emerged through the uneven playing. It was a lullaby I'd composed for my daughter when she was 3 and afraid of thunderstorms. The last note dissolved into thin air, and I felt tears running down my cheeks. The music I had suppressed for years was awakening inside me again. Maybe Robert was right. Maybe it wasn't too late. On the 10th day after the wedding, when I was beginning to believe I wouldn't hear a word from my daughter, the doorbell rang. An elderly man in a suit with a briefcase in his hand stood on the doorstep. "Dash Mrs. Quinlan?" he asked in a formal tone. "My name is Stanley Berg, and I'm the Hollingsworth family attorney." My heart dropped. Were they really going to sue me for disrupting the wedding, or was this some other legal move? "What can I do for you, Mr. Berg?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "May I come in?" "I have a message from your daughter." I let him into the house, and we sat down in the living room. The lawyer carefully opened his briefcase and took out a sealed envelope. "Miss Beatrice Quinlan, now Hollingsworth, has asked me to give this to you personally," he said, holding it out to me. She also instructed me to inform you that the family expects a public apology from you for the incident at the wedding. I took the envelope slowly, feeling the anger building inside me. A public apology? Yes. Berg nodded. A written statement on social media acknowledging the inappropriate behavior and regretting the inconvenience. It will help mitigate the negative publicity in their circles. I understand, I said, placing the envelope on the table without opening it. Well, tell my daughter and her new family that I decline. The lawyer looked surprised. Mrs. Quinlan, perhaps you don't realize the gravity of the situation. The Hollingsworth family has considerable influence. I'm well aware of their influence, Mr. Berg, and yet I refuse. I'm not going to apologize for the truth. In that case, he pressed his lips together. Miss Hollingsworth asked me to tell you that if you don't apologize, she will be forced to cut off all contact with you, permanently. I looked at this man who spoke of my daughter as a client, our relationship as a business arrangement. Something inside me finally snapped. Tell her I'll accept her decision, whatever it is, I replied calmly. But I won't apologize for telling the truth. After the lawyer left, I sat looking at the sealed envelope for a long time. Inside was probably a letter full of recriminations and accusations. I wasn't sure I wanted to read it today. Instead, I sat down at my desk and began writing my own letter to my daughter. I wrote for 3 days. It wasn't just a letter, it was the story of our family. I described how Elliot and I met, how we fell in love, how we dreamed of a music career. I talked about the moment I found out I was pregnant, the happiness we felt, the decision we made together. I detailed every sacrifice, every denial of opportunity, every time we chose her well-being over our own, not blaming, not demanding gratitude, just telling the facts about how we sold the house in Chicago to pay for her tuition at a prestigious school, about how Elliot left his orchestra position to move to Michigan City, about how I turned down an offer to teach at a New England conservatory because it would have meant splitting up the family. I wrote about the good times, too. Her first exhibitions, the pride we felt seeing her successes, how we never regretted our choice. At the end of the letter, I added a copy of my medical diagnosis and a short note. I didn't tell you about my illness because I didn't want to mar your happiness. I am not asking for help or sympathy. I just want you to know the truth about my story, my condition, about how much your father and I loved you, so much that we were willing to give up our own dreams for yours. That love doesn't need gratitude, but it deserves respect. I won't apologize for showing Elliot's video at your wedding. Perhaps the timing was unfortunate, but the truth had to be told. I hope someday you'll understand. Your mother, Winifred Quinlan. I sealed the envelope and mailed it to Beatrice's address in Chicago, with my address and phone number on the back. Part of me hoped she would respond, if not now, then at least when the emotions had settled. But as the days went by, there was no response. During this time, I began to realize both of the projects my friends had suggested to me. Every morning, I sat down with a tape recorder and recorded a fragment of my story. My childhood in a small town in Ohio, my first music lessons, my entrance to the conservatory, my acquaintance with Elliot. I talked about everything I remembered, preserving every detail, every emotion. And after lunch, when my hands usually shook less thanks to medication, I would walk to the College of Music, where Robert had arranged for me to have access to a recording studio. I started with simple pieces, Bach, Mozart, early compositions that didn't require overly complex technique. Gradually, I moved on to more difficult pieces, choosing days when I felt better. My playing was far from perfect. Sometimes I had to do dozens of takes to record one small piece. But Robert was a patient teacher and sound engineer. He edited the recordings, putting the best parts together, creating a whole from fragments. You play differently than you used to, he once said, listening to a recording of the Moonlight Sonata. More heartfelt, with more depth. I smiled, looking at my hands. Probably because now I appreciate every note I can play. When you know that something can end at any moment, you start to treat it differently. To my surprise, news of our recording spread throughout the Michigan City music community. College students asked permission to attend the sessions. Elliot's former colleagues came to listen. Even a few music critics from Chicago expressed interest in the return of legendary pianist Winifred Quinlan. Legendary? I laughed when Robert showed me an article in a music magazine. I was never a legend. You could be, he said seriously. And maybe you still will be. Late doesn't mean never. The fourth week after Beatrice's wedding, I received another unexpected visitor. Owen Hollingsworth stood on my doorstep with a bouquet of wildflowers and an awkward smile. I hope I'm not intruding, he said, shifting from foot to foot. Owen. I was genuinely happy to see him. Come in, please. We sat in the living room, drinking tea, and he talked about the aftermath of the wedding. They'd gone on their honeymoon after all, but a week late. My mother was furious. My father tried to cover up the scandal. Beatrice. He stopped talking, not knowing if he should go on. You can speak frankly, I encouraged him. I accepted the situation a long time ago. She is angry, he said bluntly. But not just at you, at herself too, though she'll never admit it. I've seen her watch the tape over and over again. Theodore doesn't know which side to take. What about you? I asked. You came here to the house of a pathetic loser, as she called me. Does your family approve of that? Owen smiled with a tinge of bitterness. My family stopped approving of anything to do with me a long time ago. I'm here because I wanted to see how you were doing. I, he pulled a flash drive out of his pocket. I heard about your music records. I thought you might want to include Elliot's composition here. I looked at the flash drive in surprise. Elliot's composition? Where did you get that? I found it in the archives of our family collection. My grandfather was a patron of the arts and sponsored young musicians in the 60s. Elliot was one of them. It's an early work before you met him, a sonata for cello and piano. Perhaps you've never heard it. My heart beat faster. Indeed, Elliot had never mentioned writing anything before we met. It was like receiving an unexpected gift from him from the past. Thank you, I whispered, accepting the flash drive. This is incredibly precious to me. Owen smiled, and for a moment I saw in him the same warmth that had always shone in Elliot's eyes. I thought you could incorporate it into your project, maybe even play the piano part. It would be, symbolic. We talked for a few more hours. Owen talked about his work with children in public school and his plans to create a music program for low-income families. I talked about my recording project and the support I've received from neighbors and friends. As he left, I felt a strange kinship with this young man who was so unlike the rest of the Hollingsworths. In a way, he reminded me of a young Elliot, with the same passion for music and the same desire to share it with others. Later that evening, I listened to Elliot's composition. It was a beautiful, melancholy piece, full of youthful energy and yet surprisingly mature for an aspiring composer. The cello sang with a deep, rich voice, and the piano part framed it, creating a harmonious duet. As I listened to the music, I thought about Elliot and me, our life together, the choices we had made, and about Beatrice, the girl for whom we had changed our destinies, the woman who had now turned her back on me. My eyes fell on the still unopened envelope I'd received from the lawyer. Perhaps it was time to find out what my daughter wanted to tell me. I opened the envelope and unfolded a sheet of short, computer-printed text. Mom, I can't forgive you for what you did at my wedding. You humiliated me in front of all the guests, in front of Theodore's family, in front of the people my career depends on. If you really loved me, like Dad claimed in that video, you would never do that. True love doesn't demand recognition, doesn't flaunt itself, doesn't seek gratitude. I need time and space to think about all of this. Please don't try to contact me. I will decide for myself when and if I am ready to talk. Beatrice, I reread the letter several times, trying to find some hope of reconciliation between the lines. But the words were cold, detached, as if written to a business associate rather than a mother, and yet there was no final breakup in them. When and if I'm ready to talk. That left the door ajar, if only a little. I folded the sheet neatly and returned it to the envelope. My answer was on its way. A letter with our family history, the truth, my diagnosis. Now all that was left to do was wait. Would Beatrice read it? Would she think for a moment about how selfish she had been all these years? Would she ever realize that Elliot and I had done everything out of love, not to reproach her? I didn't know the answers to those questions, but as I placed the envelope on the table, I felt a strange calmness. I had done all I could. Now the choice was hers. 6 months later, I'm standing at the window of my new music studio, watching the first snow of this winter fall. White flakes slowly swirl through the air, covering the trees and roofs of the houses in a thin layer. Soon classes will begin, and the studio will be filled with children's voices and the sound of music. But for now, it's quiet, and I'm enjoying these moments of peace. A lot has changed in the past 6 months. My disease is progressing, just as Dr. Patel warned. The tremors in my hands have become more noticeable, joined by occasional stiffness of movement and balance problems. On bad days, I struggle to button my blouse and can barely hold a cup of tea. But I've learned to live with it, to adapt, to find workarounds for everyday tasks. I shifted my gaze to the studio space, bright, spacious, with 2 pianos and several violins of various sizes on stands against the wall. Watercolor paintings by local artists adorn the walls, and in the corner is a small library with sheet music and books about music. The idea to create a music studio for underprivileged children came to me out of the blue. After one of my college recording sessions, I saw a group of kids watching a student orchestra rehearsal with admiration. There was such a desire to touch the instruments in their eyes, such a thirst for music, that I couldn't stay indifferent. When I returned home, I began to think about how I could use my remaining savings. The money I'd been saving for treatment, in case my condition worsened dramatically. It was a modest amount, but it would be enough to rent a small space and buy a few used instruments. I shared the idea with Helen and Robert during our weekly tea party. They listened to me with interest, but also with concern. Winnie, it's a wonderful idea, Helen said, choosing her words carefully. But you may need the money yourself. Your treatment. It's expensive, and it's going to be even more expensive. I finished for her. I know. But what good is sitting on that money if I can use it to do something meaningful now, while I can still play, while I can still teach? Robert looked thoughtfully into his cup. What if you could find sponsors, people who would support your initiative, in Michigan City? I shook my head skeptically. Who here would be interested in funding a music school for poor kids? But Robert was right. As news of my plans spread around town, unexpected helpers began to appear. The owner of a vacant room on Main Street offered a favorable rent. A local musical instrument maker volunteered to refurbish an old piano we found at a rummage sale for free. Several of Elliot's former college colleagues agreed to volunteer to give lessons once or twice a week. But the most unexpected encouragement came from Owen Hollingsworth. He called me 2 weeks after I'd started fundraising for the studio. "I've heard about your project," he said without preamble, "and I want to help." "Owen, I can't accept money from the Hollingsworth family," I replied, though part of me realized that without serious financial support, the project might not happen. "Not from the family," he clarified. "From me and a few of my musician friends. We set up a small foundation to support music education. No connection to Hollingsworth Galleries or my parents. I hesitated, and he, sensing this, added, "Look, Winifred, I know that the relationship between you and my new family is and my new family, but this has nothing to do with them. It's about music and about children who would otherwise never get a chance to touch art." There was a sincerity in his words that was impossible not to hear, and I agreed. Thanks to the support of Owen and his friends and the local community, Melody Studio opened 3 months after I first voiced the idea. We started with 20 students, children from low-income families, many of whom had never held a musical instrument before. I teach piano 4 days a week, during the hours I usually feel best. On bad days, I just sit next to the kids, guiding them with words instead of pointing. They are amazingly patient and understanding, these little students. None of them ever complain about my shaky hands or slow movements. Often, looking at their focused faces, I think of Beatrice at the same age. Her delight when she first extracted the pure sound from Elliot's violin. Her disappointment when she realized she didn't have the same talent for music as her parents. And how Elliot and I supported her choice of painting despite our own hopes. I hadn't heard from Beatrice since the day I'd sent her a letter explaining. I didn't know if she had read it, if she had thought about our story for a moment. Owen sometimes mentioned her in passing. She and Theodore had gone to live in Europe, where he was opening a branch of the Hollingsworth Gallery. They rarely communicate, even with his family, and he knows almost nothing about their lives. I have resigned myself to the fact that I may never see my daughter again. The pain of that thought will never completely go away, but it has dulled, become a part of me, like a chronic illness you learn to live with. The sound of the door opening brought me out of my musings. Helen entered the studio with a large envelope in her hands. "This came to your home address," she said, holding it out to me. "The letter carrier brought it when I went to water the flowers." I took the envelope. It had no return address, just my name and address printed on the label. The postmark was European, but I couldn't make out the country. Inside was a postcard depicting a contemporary art gallery. It was a minimalist space with high ceilings and large windows that let in sunlight to illuminate the paintings hanging on the walls. There was no signature or message on the back, just the printed address of the gallery in Berlin and an opening date set for the following month. I silently handed the postcard to Helen. She scrutinized the image and turned the card over. "Do you think it's from Beatrice?" she asked cautiously. I nodded. Who else could send me a gallery picture from Europe without a word? "It's her way of saying she's doing well," I answered, taking the card back. "And maybe to say goodbye." Helen put her hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry, Winnie." "Don't be." I smiled weakly. I'd accepted the situation a long time ago. If she's happy out there, doing what she loves, well, that's what Elliot and I worked our whole lives for. I carefully placed the card in my desk drawer, next to the picture of Elliot I always keep there. Some ties can't be broken, even if you try hard enough. A week after I received the postcard, the Melody Studio had its first small concert. Nothing grand, just an opportunity for the children to show their parents and friends what they had learned over the months. The program consisted of simple pieces that our students could already play without serious mistakes. We organized a concert in the studio, arranging chairs in rows in front of a makeshift stage. Everyone came. Parents, siblings, neighbors, friends, even a few random passers-by, attracted by the announcement at the entrance. Owen came too, even though it was a weekday and he had to travel a long way from Chicago. He sat in the last row, tall and a little awkward in his suit, too formal for such an event. The children played one by one, some confidently, some stammering and blushing with excitement, but all of them were glowing with pride when they finished their performances and received applause. I watched them sitting on the side and felt my heart fill with quiet joy. When the last student finished playing and returned to his seat, Robert, who was leading the concert, suddenly turned to the audience. And now a special surprise. The founder of our studio, Winifred Quinlan, will perform a piece that she and her husband, Elliot Quinlan, wrote many years ago but have never played publicly. I froze. We hadn't discussed it. I hadn't prepared for the performance. My hands were shaking more than usual today with excitement for the students. Robert walked over to me and said quietly, "You can do it, Winifred." Owen and I found the sheet music in Elliot's archives and did a little preparation. It would be a wonderful ending to the concert. I wanted to object, to say I couldn't play well enough, that my hands would fail me. But then I saw the children's faces, curious, delighted, expectant, and I realized I had to try. Slowly, I got up and walked over to the piano. The sheet music was already on the lectern. The Dance of the Leaves, a little piece Elliot and I had written together in our first year of married life. We had dreamed of creating a whole cycle of such compositions, but life had turned out differently. I sat down at the instrument and put my hands on the keys. They trembled, and I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to calm down. Then I began to play. The first notes were difficult, but gradually the music took hold of me. It was a simple but evocative melody, inspired by the fall landscapes of Michigan, the leaves twirling in the wind, dancing before they fell to the ground. I put into it all the memories of happy days with Elliot, of our life together, of the love we shared. My fingers moved across the keys, sometimes tentatively, sometimes with unexpected precision. When I reached the middle section, something amazing happened. The piano was joined by the cello. I looked up and saw Owen standing next to me with the instrument in his hands. He nodded to me, and we continued on together. Elliot had never recorded the cello part for this piece, but Owen had somehow captured its spirit, improvising as if he had always known the music. His playing enveloped mine, supporting me when my fingers stumbled and pulling back when I found my rhythm. We ended on a quiet, peaceful note that seemed to hang in the air for a few moments after the instruments went silent. There was absolute silence in the room, and then the applause broke out, sincere, warm, and filled with that special respect that people feel when they witness something real. I looked at my students, at their shining faces, and realized that I had found my place. Not on the big stage, not in concert halls, where I could have performed if I had made a different choice, but here in a small studio, among children to whom I could pass on my love of music. After the concert, as the guests began to leave, Owen came up to me with his cello in his hands. "It was beautiful," he said. "Thank you for letting me join in. You were the one who prepared the surprise," I replied. "How did you know the cello part?" "I didn't," he smiled. "I just felt it. Elliot's music. It's like it's talking to you, telling you what to do next." We stood at the window, watching the last of the guests walk away down the snowy street. "I think he'd be pleased," Owen said quietly, "with what you're doing here, the way you live now." I nodded, feeling tears come to my eyes. You know, I've never regretted choosing my family over my career, but sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I didn't finish the sentence. "If you'd kept performing," Owen suggested. "Yeah, if Elliot and I hadn't moved here for Beatrice's school, if he'd stayed in the orchestra, if we'd thought more of ourselves and less of her." Owen thought for a moment before answering. "I think every choice creates its own beauty. Your life turned out exactly as it should have, and today you played it the way only you could play it, with the history, the experience, the love you have." His words touched something deep inside me. He was right. I had not lived all these years in vain. My life was not a mistake or a regret. It was exactly as it was meant to be, with all its joys and pains, gains and losses. I looked at my hands, the hands of a pianist, hands that now shook with illness but could still make music, the hands that held newborn Beatrice, wiped away her tears, applauded her successes, the hands that Elliot loved so much. You know, I said, I think I've found my place, not the one I once planned, but where I should be now. Owen smiled and put his hand gently on my shoulder. I'm glad I found you, Winifred. You've taught me more in these months than many teachers have taught me in years. We stood like that for a while longer, watching the snow fall slowly outside the window, covering the city in a white blanket. Life went on, despite all the losses and disappointments, and there was still room for music, for learning, for new connections. Beatrice had chosen her path, far away from me. I accepted that. Maybe one day she will remember me, not with anger or shame, but with understanding. Maybe she'll even come back. But even if that never happened, I would continue to live my life, the life I had created. With these thoughts, I turned to the piano and began arranging notes for tomorrow's lessons. A new day, new students, new music waiting to be played.